A single black dad walks into a blind date, wearing ripped jeans, holding his twin daughters by the hand. He doesn't expect kindness and definitely not love. But when the woman across the table pays the bill without hesitation and laughs with his girls like they've always belonged to her, everything shifts. What she doesn't know is he's a millionaire in hiding, and what happens next turns an ordinary night into one of the most heartwarming romances you'll ever witness. So, where are you watching from, and what time of day is it for you right now? The late afternoon sky was draped in a soft golden hue as the sun hovered just above the horizon, casting a warm glow across the sidewalk. The air was crisp with a hint of spring clinging to the breeze, and the fading daylight shimmered off the hoods of parked cars along the narrow city street. Richard Edison, a tall man with deep brown skin and close-cropped hair peppered with gray, stood in the middle of a modest restaurant parking lot wearing faded denim jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. The calm authority that had once commanded boardrooms and media attention was now focused on keeping his balance as two small hands tugged at his shirt. There was no tailored jacket, no cufflinks, no driver waiting with the door held open. Instead, his arms were full, one carrying a well-worn diaper bag slung across his shoulder, the other holding two wriggling bundles of motion and chatter his twin daughters Jazzy and Daisy. The girls, just 4 years old, wore bright leggings, slightly scuffed sneakers, and shirts speckled with glitter paint from an earlier art project. Their deep brown skin glowed under the evening light, and their tight coils of natural hair were pulled into two high puffs, each puff bouncing with every excited glance. Mismatched barrettes, one shaped like a star, the other a butterfly clipped onto their edges, barely holding against the spring in their curls. Their big brown eyes scanned everything around them, filled with curiosity and the unfiltered honesty only children possess. Inside the restaurant, a quiet hum of early dinner conversation filled the softly lit room. Small pendant lights hung low over each table, casting intimate circles of golden light that glowed against the warm wooden furniture. The clinking of glasses and distant sizzle from the kitchen were underscored by soft jazz, giving the place a calm, cozy ambiance. Richard stepped in his daughters, pressing against his legs, their small hands still gripping the hem of his t-shirt as they scanned the space with cautious wonder. He adjusted the diaper bag and approached the hostess stand. The woman behind it was impeccably dressed, her makeup flawless, and her expression unreadable until her eyes dropped to the children beside him. "You brought your children to a date?" she asked in a low voice, one brow arching slightly as she surveyed the situation. Richard exhaled slowly, offering a small, polite nod. He shifted his weight and gently hoisted Daisy higher on his hip. "Yes," he said, "it's not really a date." The hostess paused for a moment, then after a quick glance at her reservation list, nodded toward a table near the front window. "You're in luck," she said. "Only one reservation with children tonight. Table 5. Richard nodded again in gratitude, but the pit in his stomach tightened. He already knew. He knew before he parked the borrowed 2009 sedan, before he walked through the door. His date, or the woman who was supposed to be his date, was not coming. Her message had been blunt and final. "Sorry, can't date a broke dad of 2. Good luck." He could still hear the words, not just the text itself, but the silence that followed. No room for a response, no chance for explanation. The words had looped in his mind all afternoon, their dismissal sharp and cutting. He almost turned around right then. His grip on Jazzy's hand tightened slightly. He thought about sparing his daughters the confusion, the noise of the room, the sympathetic glances he might receive. This evening had been a long shot to begin with a hopeful flicker in an otherwise dim season of his life. He began to gather the girls again, the movement mechanical, his disappointment settling like a stone in his chest. Then the restaurant door swung open. The bell overhead gave a soft chime as the door eased shut behind her. A woman stepped in, brushing wind-blown strands of blonde hair away from her face. She was carrying a canvas tote slung over one shoulder and a paperback novel that looked like it had lived through many rereads. Her eyes scanned the room. Slowly, her brow furrowed in brief confusion as she checked her phone, then glanced back up. Her gaze stopped when it landed on Richard's table. She walked toward him with hesitant steps, her free hand fidgeting with the corner of her book. Her smile was unsure but sincere, as though she, too, wasn't completely convinced this was the right table, but had decided to trust her gut anyway. "Hi," she said. "I'm Hillary. Sorry I'm late. The bus was slow." Richard blinked, caught off guard. He opened his mouth to clarify, to explain that she must have mistaken him for someone else. But then he looked at her, really looked. Her expression was open, gentle, with just enough nervousness to feel genuine. There was no guardedness, no pretense, just a quiet sincerity that seemed startling in its honesty. Something shifted in him. "No problem," he heard himself say. "We just got here." Hillary glanced down at the twins, who were now sitting upright in their chairs, wide-eyed and curious. "I didn't realize I'd be dining with such esteemed company," she said with a soft laugh. Daisy, ever the bold one, squinted up at her. "Do you like cats?" Hillary laughed again, this time more relaxed. "More than I like most people." Jazzy, without hesitation, pushed a purple crayon across the table. "Draw one." Hillary accepted the challenge with grace. She pulled a napkin from the dispenser and began sketching a crooked, smiling kitten. Within minutes, the twins were giggling uncontrollably, enchanted by her exaggerated drawing and playful commentary. Richard sat back, watching in stunned silence. The usual tension, the awkwardness that came with introducing someone to his daughters, was simply not there. This wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It was easy. It was real. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to stay in that moment. Dinner arrived not with ceremony, but with delightful, messy urgency, the kind of chaos only young children could orchestrate. The soft glow of pendant lights overhead gleamed off spilled drops of orange juice and cast gentle shadows on the white tablecloth, now speckled with flecks of spaghetti sauce. Jazzy had managed to swirl her fork a little too enthusiastically, sending a tomato-streaked noodle onto her napkin and then to the edge of Hillary's sleeve. Daisy, absorbed in explaining the story behind her imaginary pet rock, tipped her cup without noticing. Juice puddled near her plate, and a napkin was hastily sacrificed. Hillary didn't flinch. There was no gasp, no scolding, no performance of patience. She simply dabbed at Daisy's chin with calm fingers and chuckled as she shared a memory, how as a child she'd once tripped during a birthday story time at the library and landed face first into the cake. The girls burst into laughter, loud and genuine, their giggles rippling through the air like music that Richard hadn't realized he'd missed. He watched the scene unfold, his eyes lingering on Hillary as she wiped her arm without complaint, then leaned closer to help Jazzy cut a stubborn meatball. Something moved in Richard's chest, not sharp, not sudden, but deep and unmistakably warm. For years, everything had felt constructed, his days full of orchestrated meetings, calculated expressions, carefully crafted narratives. But now, in the middle of this small, ordinary restaurant with a woman who wasn't supposed to be here, and two girls who had long needed to laugh like this, something about the moment felt astonishingly natural. There was no judgment in Hillary's glance, no attempt to decode his status or subtly probe into his income. Instead, she looked at the children when they spoke, truly looked, and when she smiled, it came from a place of stillness, not performance. Hillary didn't ask him about his job. She didn't bring up money or headlines or rumors about corporate maneuvering. She didn't seem to recognize the name Edison as anything other than his. Instead, she asked Jazzy what her favorite animal was, listened as though the answer were a treasured secret, and nodded thoughtfully as Daisy told the elaborate story of a magic rock she had discovered behind their apartment building. Richard found himself watching Hillary's face, how her brow lifted gently when she listened, how she leaned forward to meet the girls on their level. When she caught his eyes across the table, she didn't blush or look away. She just smiled, small and soft, with a kind of sincerity that disarmed him more than any flirtation ever could. Midway through the meal, a server approached quietly and set down a leather-bound folder near the edge of the table. "Take your time," he said politely. "Dessert's next." The folder lay there, closed simple, but suddenly very loud in Richard's mind. His hand instinctively moved toward his back pocket. Then it stalled. This wasn't his usual routine. These weren't his tailored trousers. The jeans he wore had been borrowed along with the car outside. He hadn't checked to see if there was even a wallet in them. A flicker of panic passed through him, brief but sharp. Not because he couldn't pay. He could have bought the restaurant if he wanted. But because in that moment he felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt since the first week after Caroline died, when everything felt out of control, and nothing, no matter how well managed, could stop the unraveling. Hillary noticed. She didn't gasp, didn't offer to lend money with pity in her tone. She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she gave him a smile, gentle, unassuming, and reached calmly into her worn leather wallet. With a motion that was practiced but never showy, she pulled out a well-used credit card and handed it to the server. "It's fine," she said, easily tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've had worse dinner dates." Richard turned to her, momentarily stunned by the calm grace of it all. "You didn't have to," he said, voice low. "I know," Hillary answered, her voice equally quiet. She met his eyes without blinking. "But I wanted to. You looked like you needed someone to just be kind." He didn't know what to say to that. Around them, the restaurant hummed on soft music, clinking glasses, distant laughter. But in Richard's ears, everything dimmed. It wasn't about the money. That wasn't the point. He could have called his assistant, texted his banker, left a tip larger than the meal. But that gesture, that simple, quiet offer, cut through all of it. It wasn't charity. It was care. The kind people used to offer when they weren't trying to get something in return. He looked at her more closely. The blouse she wore was simple cotton, a little faded at the sleeves. Her hands bore no rings, her nails unpainted. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, the kind that come from late nights with overdue library records, not luxury galas. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply here, present, human, and for reasons he couldn't quite articulate that made Richard feel seen in a way no magazine cover or investor call ever had. The restaurant had begun to empty, the noise thinning into a background murmur as diners filtered out into the cool night. Soft jazz still played overhead now, less masked by conversation, and the golden pendant lights cast a dim, cozy glow across empty tables. But their table in the far corner near the window remained alive. Crayons rolled across the wood surface like tiny logs in a stream. Napkins were scrawled with colorful doodles, and soft laughter drifted between bites of dinner. Hillary reached for a breadstick, breaking it cleanly in two before offering half to Jazzy. Her voice was calm, unhurried, as she picked up where she'd left off in her story. "I grew up in a house where money was tight," she said, her eyes softening as her gaze wandered, slightly caught in the thread of memory. "We didn't have much, not clothes, not furniture. But we had books. Everywhere. Piled up in corners, balanced on windowsills, even lined up along the floor like stepping stones. My mom used to read to me every night by candlelight when the power was cut. That's why I became a librarian. Books made me feel rich even when everything else felt uncertain." Her tone wasn't heavy. There was no bitterness, no performative humility, just a quiet reverence for what had shaped her. Richard listened closely, elbows resting on the table, one hand cradling his glass. What struck him wasn't just her story, it was the ease with which she told it, the absence of self-pity, the clarity of her gratitude. Most people he met wanted to impress. They angled the conversation toward his net worth, asked about his homes, his cars, his vacations. But Hillary didn't ask him a single question about what he did. She didn't even seem to care. She only looked at him when he spoke, truly looked like she wanted to understand the man behind the headlines. And that made him feel for the first time in years like he was being seen, not assessed. "You must love your job," he said quietly, still watching her. Hillary nodded, her expression gentle. "I do. The kids who come in after school, they light up when I remember their names or when I set aside a book I think they'll love. It's small, I know, but it feels like it matters." She smiled, then turned to Jazzy, who had leaned her head gently against Hillary's arm, clearly growing tired. Hillary reached up and brushed a crumb from the girl's cheek, her fingers careful and maternal. "These girls," she whispered, "are something special." Richard felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected to feel so much, hadn't meant to. "They are my world," he said, barely above a whisper. When the meal finally wound down, Richard stood brushing crumbs from his jeans. He reached for Hillary's coat draped over the chair back, offering it to her as he said, "Can I walk you to the bus stop, or at least give you a ride?" His tone was light, almost self-deprecating. "It's not a fancy car, but it gets from point A to point B." Hillary took the coat slowly, then glanced out the window at the dim street. She hesitated, then gave a small smile. "It's okay. I like the walk. Helps me clear my head." He tried not to let his disappointment show. He nodded, once hands slipping into his pockets. "Of course." She bent down toward Jazzy and Daisy, kissing Jazzy gently on the forehead. "Thanks for the cat drawing, artist. Come draw again," Daisy chirped, still playing with the ends of her crayon. Hillary's smile lingered. "Maybe." Then she pulled her coat tight, gave Richard a parting glance, and stepped into the night, the restaurant door closing softly behind her. The ride home was quiet. The girls, full and content, were already dozing in their booster seats, their fingers still smudged with crayon and pasta sauce. The only sound in the car was the hum of the engine and the occasional click of a blinker. On the dashboard, a folded napkin fluttered slightly with the car's motion, a child's drawing of a cat with too many whiskers and crooked little letters that spelled out Hillary plus Jazzy. Richard glanced at it more than once during the drive. Later, parked in the wide, dark stillness of his garage, he sat for a long moment before cutting the engine. The twins were still asleep. He looked at the drawing again, and something inside him tightened. His mind wandered back years ago to a different kitchen, a different night. Caroline, his late wife, had been sitting cross-legged on the floor, with the girls drawing farm animals with washable markers on old newspaper. She had been laughing big and unguarded while the girls squealed in delight. That memory had stayed with him, stubborn and haunting. It had made every date since feel like a betrayal, made every smile from someone new feel like he was moving too fast. But tonight felt different. Watching Hillary with the girls, seeing her wipe orange juice off her sleeve without flinching, hearing her laugh alongside them, brushing crumbs from Jazzy's face, he hadn't felt guilt. He hadn't felt fear. He'd felt something else entirely. Peace. A kind of quiet, hard-won peace. The realization caught him off guard. Maybe healing wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was permission to hope, to continue to believe that something gentle could still grow in a life interrupted by grief. He looked at the drawing one more time, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the glove compartment. He didn't know if he'd see Hillary again. There had been no promises, no numbers exchanged, no dramatic farewell. But she had left something with him, something real. 4 full days had passed since that unexpected dinner, 4 days since Hillary had unknowingly walked into the wrong date and somehow managed to disarm Richard completely. Not with charm or polished flirtation, but with crayon, spilled spaghetti sauce, and a type of sincerity he hadn't experienced in years. The image of her face lingered with him, the way she laughed with Jazzy and Daisy, unbothered by the chaos around her, the way she paid the bill, not out of pity or show, but instinct, like kindness, was simply her nature. She hadn't flinched once, not at the mess, not at the noise, not even at the reality of who he was beneath the surface. And all he had to go on now was one passing comment she'd made toward the end of the evening. "I work at the library near Pine Street, the one with the red doors." On Saturday morning, the air was cool and the sky overcast, but there was no hesitation in Richard as he packed the girls into the car. He didn't tell himself it was a plan, just a visit, he said, a casual trip to the library. No pressure, no expectations. But he knew better. Beneath that practiced detachment was hope, plain and persistent. The red doors weren't hard to spot. They stood boldly against the brick exterior framed by ivy that crawled upward like green veins. Inside, the scent of old pages and wood polish wrapped around them the moment they stepped through. It was the kind of smell that brought back memories, classroom corners, rainy afternoons, with books propped open on laps, stories read aloud in soft, patient voices. The library was quiet but alive. Children's laughter floated from the back, where a small group sat cross-legged on a brightly colored rug. A woman in a soft blue cardigan sat in front of them, a worn picture book open in her lap. And then the bear said, "Who took my hat?" Her voice rose with playful exaggeration, sending the group into giggles. Richard's breath caught. He nudged Daisy gently. "That's her," he whispered. Daisy clapped her small hands. "She's here." Before he could stop them, the twins darted forward, weaving between the other children, with the speed and enthusiasm only 4-year-olds could muster. They reached Hillary in seconds, Jazzy nearly stumbling as she skidded to a stop. Hillary paused, startled by the sudden movement, her eyes lifting from the book. Then slowly she looked up and saw him. Richard stood just beyond the archway, hands in the pockets of his charcoal jacket shoulders, slightly hunched like he wasn't sure if he belonged. Their eyes met. For a long second, neither of them spoke. "Hi," he said, finally softly. She closed the book gently. "Everyone, we'll take a quick break. 5 minutes, okay?" The children groaned in protest, but they obeyed, shuffling toward beanbags and coloring sheets. Hillary stood, brushing invisible creases from her skirt as she faced him fully. "You found me," she said, not accusing, but not exactly inviting either. Richard nodded. "I remembered what you said about the red doors." The air between them was thick, not angry, not cold, but full of things unsaid, a quiet tension that held its breath. Jazzy, standing between them, held up a folded piece of paper decorated in bright marker. "We made you another drawing." She beamed. Hillary looked down, her face softening as she accepted it. "Thank you, sweetie," she said, gently kneeling slightly to meet Jazzy's eyes. She unfolded the paper slowly, her thumb grazing a smudged heart in the corner. Then she looked up at Richard again. "You were not the man I was supposed to meet that night." "No," he admitted, his voice even honest. "You were meeting someone else." Hillary's arms crossed, not with hostility, but with guarded curiosity. "Then why did you stay?" Richard took a breath. Not rushed, not defensive, just deep. "Because I couldn't walk away," he said. "Not when someone finally saw me. Not the CEO version, not the guy on magazine covers. Just me." The dad trying to hold things together. The man who still misses his wife. The one who needed a night that didn't feel like a transaction. His voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. There was truth in it, and it sat heavy in the quiet space between them. He hadn't planned to say it that way, but now that the words were out, he didn't take them back. He couldn't. They were real, and she deserved real. Hillary looked at him. Really looked as though trying to decide whether to let the moment pass or lean into it. Outside, through the tall windows, the clouds shifted slightly. Light filtered in soft and dappled painting faint shadows across the library floor, and neither of them moved. Hillary's lips parted slightly, her expression unreadable. "I didn't lie." Richard said the words, coming quickly, almost reflexively, but without panic. "I didn't pretend to be someone else. I just didn't correct you. Because for once, someone wasn't looking at me through a lens of money or power." He paused, breathing a little deeper as he took a small step closer, his voice lowered, not in secrecy, but in sincerity. "You sat down and listened to my daughters. You paid the bill without flinching. You laughed when things got messy." Hillary's expression shifted, still guarded, but no longer sharp. Her eyes softened even as they stayed locked on his. He could see her weighing everything, not rushing, not reacting, listening. "My name is Richard Edison," he continued, his voice steady now. "I run a company that probably made your library's donation boxes. I own too many suits. I live in a house that's too big for 3 people, and most of the time, I hate it. But the other night, none of that mattered. Not because I was pretending to be someone else, but because you didn't make me feel like I had to be anything more than who I already was." Hillary swallowed hard, then glanced over her shoulder. Jazzy and Daisy were sitting a few feet away, flipping through board books, their voices quiet, their legs kicking gently against the rug. Hillary took a breath and turned back, so she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "What now?" "I don't know," Richard admitted, and that honesty sat heavy but peaceful between them. "I just knew I couldn't let you disappear without telling you the truth. Not because I think it'll change anything, but because you deserve to hear it." She looked down at the drawing in her hands, a napkin creased at the corners with a crooked cat drawn in purple crayon. Above it, a pink heart hovered, and beneath it, written in bold, childlike letters, "For Hillary." "What I saw that night," she murmured almost to herself, "was real. The way you looked at them, the way they looked at you, the way you watched me like you were seeing something that scared you." She paused, her thumb brushing lightly over the napkin. "That wasn't fake. It wasn't." Richard said, his voice full but quiet. Hillary looked up again, meeting his eyes. Her voice was firmer now, though still gentle. "But I need time to figure out what's real, especially when everything else around you feels complicated." Richard nodded once. "Take all the time you need." There was a pause. Not rushed, not final. It held space for doubt, for possibility. It wasn't a goodbye. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The days that followed were simple, almost deliberately so. Richard found reasons to bring the girls to the library more often, checking out books they hadn't touched in years, letting them browse slowly, pretending he wasn't watching the front desk. Hillary, always poised behind the counter or cross-legged in the children's section, would offer a quiet smile whenever they entered. It was never overdone. She always made it look like a pleasant surprise, like they'd just happened to wander in. They never talked long. A few words here and there. But the presence was steady. Hillary would crouch beside the girls, help them find a picture book, sometimes slide a sticker into their checkout pile. She laughed when Jazzy insisted on checking out the same fairy tale 4 times. She gently helped Daisy sound out unfamiliar words. One afternoon they met at the park, unintentionally at first. The sun was out, the sky stretched wide with late spring light, and the grass was warm beneath bare feet. Jazzy and Daisy ran through it, without shoes, chasing each other across the lawn, their giggles high and untethered. Hillary sat under a tree, reading aloud from a slim, well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Her voice rose and fell, like breath, casual, melodic, comforting. Richard watched from a nearby bench, his arms stretched along the backrest, his legs crossed at the ankle. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. There was something about watching Hillary interact with the girls that slowed everything down. There was no flash, no performance, just a woman with a book and the ability to make his daughters feel seen. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't romantic, but it was real. And it meant something. Then on a quiet Friday evening, a folded piece of paper appeared in Hillary's mailbox. The envelope was slightly wrinkled and sealed with a sticker shaped like a rainbow. Inside the note was written in large, uneven letters, clearly the work of small, enthusiastic hands. "Dear Miss Hillary, come eat dinner with us. We made drawings and cookies. Love Jazzy and Daisy and Daddy too." Hillary stood at her mailbox for a moment longer than she needed to. Her hand rested lightly over her chest as she read the note again, a smile forming warm, full, and instant. She didn't have to think about it. There was no question. She already knew she couldn't say no. That Sunday, the sun hung low in a sky streaked with soft amber light, the kind of late afternoon that made everything feel a little more nostalgic, a little more intimate. Richard drove them to a small cottage nestled at the edge of town, where the trees grew taller and the roads grew quieter. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, the tires crunching beneath them, he glanced at Hillary. "This was my mom's house," he said. "I keep it just the way she left it. It's where I go when I don't want to be Mr. Edison." The cottage was modest but warm. Terracotta pots lined the porch filled with cheerful marigolds and fading mums. An old wind chime swayed gently from the eaves, letting out a soft, familiar clinking with each passing breeze. It didn't feel curated. It felt lived in, loved. Inside the living room had been transformed into an art gallery of the twins' making. Crayon drawings, some abstract, some barely legible, were taped to every wall. Rainbows, stick figures, lopsided animals, all in bright, chaotic color. Hillary laughed as soon as she stepped through the door. "You weren't kidding about the drawings." Jazzy rushed forward and grabbed her hand. "Come, sit by me." Dinner was spaghetti again at the twins' insistence. Richard wore an apron that read "Kiss the Cook," and though he tried to act nonchalant, he gave himself away every time he wiped a fresh splatter of sauce from his shirt. The girls talked over each other, their voices bubbling with excitement, bouncing from one topic to the next. Favorite colors, library books, a spider they had seen outside. Hillary listened patiently, asked thoughtful questions past the bread, and never once glanced at her phone. She was fully present. After the dishes were cleared, Richard emerged from a closet with a box of old board games, setting them on the coffee table with a grin. Meanwhile, Hillary helped tidy up the kitchen stacking plates, wiping counters, humming softly to herself. It wasn't performative. It wasn't awkward. It was natural. Later, as the night settled in and the girls began to tire, Jazzy sat on the floor to take off her shoes. Her curly hair had come loose from its clips and hung in her eyes. Hillary kneeled beside her. "Your hair's in your eyes," she said gently. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny hairpin, carefully brushing Jazzy's bangs aside and fastening the curl back in place. Jazzy looked up at her eyes, wide and full of light. Richard stood in the doorway, drying a plate with a towel. The movement stopped as he watched. The look in his daughter's eyes, the trust, the ease, the quiet joy struck him harder than he expected. There was no coaching, no prompting. Just a child looking at someone with unguarded affection. Hillary sat back on her heels, her knees creaking slightly, and looked up. "I've never seen a child trust me that quickly," she said, almost to herself. Richard stepped forward, the dish towel hanging forgotten from his hand. His voice was low but clear. "I've never seen anyone make them feel safe so fast." Hillary blinked, her surprise evident. "I mean it," he continued. "They don't open up like that. Not since Caroline passed. It's like they can sense things, what's genuine, what's not. You walked into our lives and it was like they'd been waiting for you." Her eyes shimmered, and she looked away, brushing a hand over her jeans. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time," she admitted. "I just care." Richard placed the plate down quietly and stepped closer. "That's exactly what they need," he said. The room was still. Outside, the wind chime rang softly again. Inside, there was no fanfare, no declarations, just a quiet knowing. Something had changed, and no one needed to say it aloud. The girls were now curled up together on the living room rug, their heads gently resting against one another as they turned the pages of a picture book with soft, unhurried hands. The evening light filtered through gauzy curtains, casting a golden wash over the room. Outside, the world carried on its headlines, its speed, its noise. But in this cottage, nestled in a quiet corner of town, that chaos felt distant, almost unreal. Richard sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, watching the twins in silence. He didn't speak until Hillary, standing nearby, turned to him. Her voice was soft but clear. "You're different here." He looked up at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm myself," he said simply, "when I'm not being chased by headlines or asked about stock projections." She took a slow step closer, her expression open, unguarded. "You don't have to prove anything here. Not to them, not to me." He exhaled, and for a moment his posture changed. His shoulders dropped, his face softened. Vulnerability flickered in his eyes. "That's what scares me most," he admitted. "That it's real." Hillary's voice lowered just above a whisper. "Then don't run from it." Richard met her gaze and held it, really held it. It wasn't the kind of look born out of charm or desire. It was deeper than that, rooted in awe, in recognition, in quiet gratitude. Because somewhere along the way, this woman had stepped into their world with no intention of taking anything, and yet she had given something priceless. Her presence, her patience, her kindness, it had wrapped itself around the jagged edges of their grief. And in doing so, she had started to make that world feel whole again. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, everything changed. A grainy photograph surfaced online, one snapped from behind a tree branch by someone hiding across the street. It showed Hillary walking hand in hand with Jazzy and Daisy, the three of them leaving the Pine Street Library. The girls were mid-skip carefree, their curls bouncing with each step. Hillary was smiling. The caption beneath the image read, "Mystery woman spotted with Edison twins, who is she?" Within hours, the photo had been shared thousands of times. By noon, Hillary's name was trending. By evening, the press had pieced together enough breadcrumbs to fully connect her to Richard. News vans began lining her street. Paparazzi waited by her front stoop, lenses pointed toward her windows, shouting questions any time she stepped outside. Headlines speculated without evidence: secret marriage, Edison's hidden family librarian, or liar, her quiet life, the one she had built with care and intention, was torn apart in less than a day. Richard watched it all unfold in real time. The coverage was relentless. His name was everywhere again, but this time it wasn't just about stock prices or mergers. It was tied to someone who had never sought fame, someone who had simply cared for his children and for him without asking for anything in return. He called her again and again. No answer. At the library the following morning, the director summoned her to a back office. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting a sterile glow over the small space. His face was drawn, his voice low and uneasy. "There's been pressure," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "One of our top donors has threatened to pull funding. They say the media frenzy is too distracting." Hillary's heart sank into her stomach. Her mouth opened, but her voice was thin. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," the director said quietly, "but they don't care about what's right or fair, only how it looks." He didn't offer a defense. He didn't fight for her. She walked out of the library a short time later, a cardboard box in her arms filled with items she had collected over years: well-loved pens, bookmarks, a photo of her and the Storytime kids. The hallway was silent, except for the sound of her footsteps. Colleagues stood nearby but said nothing. Their whispers clung to the air like fog. It had taken her years to build that small life, a life where she mattered, where she made a difference. And now, because of one moment, one photo, it had all unraveled. That night, Hillary sat alone on the worn fabric of her living room couch, wrapped in a silence so dense it seemed to press against her chest. The curtains were drawn, the only light in the room, a dim lamp casting a pool of amber over the coffee table littered with unopened mail and a half-drunk cup of tea, now gone cold. Her phone buzzed again, another message, another notification. The screen was a stream of names she didn't recognize, reporters, strangers, people who had decided she was worth speculating about. Some demanded answers. Others offered opinions she had never asked for. She ignored them all, except one. "Hillary, please talk to me." "I had no idea this would happen. Richard." She read that one 3 times, but she didn't reply. The next morning, the chaos she had been avoiding arrived right at her doorstep. Reporters lined the sidewalk in front of her building, their voices tangled in the air like static, each one calling her name, demanding her attention. Microphones thrust forward, camera flashes fired. Curious neighbors peered through blinds and half-cracked doors. One woman down the hall, robe cinched tight, and curlers still in, called out, "Is it true? Are you marrying him?" Hillary pressed her back against the wall just inside her apartment, breathing slow, measured breaths. Her fingers clenched around the strap of her shoulder bag. Then, amidst the shouting, a new sound split the air, the firm thud of a car door followed by footsteps. The noise outside shifted. The crowd grew quiet in the way people do when something unexpected pulls their attention in one direction. The murmurs gave way to a hush. Hillary moved toward her window and, pulling the curtain back just an inch, saw him, Richard Edison, standing at the bottom of her steps. His coat was open, a dark gray tailored piece he hadn't bothered to fasten, against the wind that tugged at his sleeves. His hair was tousled, not in the careful way stylists arrange, but in the honest, human way of someone who had run his hands through it a dozen times on the drive over. The camera shutters clicked like distant thunder. He didn't look at them. He didn't speak to them. His gaze was locked on one thing, her door. Hillary's breath caught. Her hand, still clutching the edge of the curtain, trembled. Below, Richard took a step forward and raised his voice not with the practiced polish of a press conference, but with the raw, cracking edge of someone who was scared, who meant every word. "I can't change the world, Hillary," he called out, voice rising just above the hum of reporters. "But I can stand between you and it. I can take the cameras, the questions, the noise. Just say the word. Let me stand with you." She stood frozen by the door. Her heart pounded hard enough that she could hear it in her ears. Tears welled and spilled over before she could stop them. Her hand hovered over the lock, her fingers resting gently against the cold brass. She didn't open it. Her voice was soft but clear through the door. "You have to protect your daughters. Don't let them get caught in this mess." His reply came without pause. "They're already in it, because they asked about you every night this week. Because they miss you. And so do I." Hillary leaned her forehead against the door, the wood cool against her skin. She bit her lip to hold back a sob. "I didn't ask for this," she said, the words breaking as they left her. "I know," Richard answered, "but neither did we. And yet, somehow, this became the most real thing I've had in years." There was silence after that, a long, aching silence. The cameras continued to click. A gust of wind tugged at the bushes lining the sidewalk. Somewhere a car horn honked in the distance, disconnected from the moment entirely. Inside, Hillary stared at the doorknob, willing herself to move to speak again. But all she managed was one last whisper, "I'm sorry, but I need you to go." Below, Richard didn't argue. He didn't push. He just stood there, his jaw set, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. After a beat, he gave a small nod, barely perceptible, and turned back toward the crowd. He moved slowly, his every step deliberate. The reporters pressed forward again, their voices rising with questions, but he said nothing. Hillary slid down the door knees, drawn up her back, resting against the wood that separated them. The box from the library sat beside her, the corner of a familiar book poking out. She stared at it through blurred vision. The world outside spun louder and faster, and for the first time in years, she wished it would just stop. Just stop so she could breathe. The paper was still there. Hillary hadn't taken it down, not even once. It remained taped slightly crooked on her front door, its crayon colors now a little faded by the sun. Jazzy's purple handwriting wobbled across the top, "We miss you, Miss Hillary." At the corner, an orange handprint, clearly Daisy's, smudged the edge like a seal. For 3 days, every time Hillary stepped out for groceries or the mail, her fingers hovered at the edge of the paper. Sometimes they lingered, brushing the uneven texture of wax and fingerprints, but they never pulled the tape free. Each time she turned away, a hollow ache bloomed deeper in her chest. The frenzy outside her apartment had mostly died down. The cameras were gone. The reporters had moved on to a newer scandal with fresher headlines. Her name still floated in stray tweets and half-finished blog posts, but the world had mercifully begun to look elsewhere. Still, nothing had gone back to normal. Her job remained on indefinite pause. She hadn't been inside the library since the meeting. She told herself that the quiet was good, that distance was necessary, that silence could protect everyone involved. But each night the quiet gnawed at her. She dreamed of small fingers in hers, of laughter over picture books, of sticky hands and chaotic meals. She missed the house on the edge of town. She missed the drawings. She missed the girls. And she missed Richard. At his home, silence had grown roots. The laughter that once echoed through the hallways had dulled. The crayons were still there, and so were the picture books, but they sat untouched. The girls noticed first, not the headlines or the tension in Richard's jaw, but the absence of a person, a warmth, a presence they had come to rely on. On the third night, as he tucked them into bed, Daisy crawled into his lap without a word. Her dark eyes, wide and serious, studied his face as if trying to read a language she didn't yet understand. "Is Miss Hillary gone forever?" she asked, her voice small. Richard swallowed hard and wrapped his arms around her. "No, sweetheart, she just needs a little time." Daisy pressed her face into his shirt. Did we do something wrong? That question cracked something open in him. He tightened his hold. "No, you didn't do anything wrong. She loves you so much." Her voice wavered as she whispered, "Then why didn't she come back?" He had no answer. None that a 4-year-old could understand. None that didn't hurt to say out loud. The next morning, he found them both at the kitchen table. There was no music, no cartoons on the TV, just the soft scratch of crayons. Jazzy and Daisy sat in silence, heads bent close, occasionally trading colors without speaking. It wasn't until they finished that Jazzy looked up and held the paper out. 3 stick figures stood beneath a giant heart. Above them, in crooked but careful letters, were the words, "We bring our hearts." Richard stared at it for a long time. Something inside him shifted. He stood, gently took the paper, and knelt beside his daughters. "We're going to see her," he said. Jazzy's face lit up immediately. Daisy clapped softly, eyes wide with hope. They dressed without a word of protest, coach shoes, mismatched gloves. Richard avoided the main streets. He drove slowly, watching the sidewalks. No reporters, no flashing lights. Still, he parked 2 blocks away, just in case. He carried both girls in his arms, tight against his chest, one on each side, as they approached the building. The first drawing still fluttered on the door, its tape beginning to curl at the edges. Richard knocked gently. Nothing. He knocked again, softer this time. Still nothing. He looked down. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Jazzy nodded. Richard handed her the new drawing. She stepped forward, peeled a fresh piece of tape from his coat pocket, and carefully placed their new message directly beneath the old one. Then she stepped back. The twins stood side by side in front of the door, their arms outstretched in the universal shape of a waiting hug. Silent. Still. Just hoping. Just holding space for the chance that someone would open the door and see them there, ready to love without conditions. And in that stillness, the air held its breath. Inside her small apartment, Hillary sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of children's books she had pulled from every shelf. The morning light filtered through half-closed blinds, casting long, uneven lines across the hardwood floor. She hadn't really planned to sort the books. She just needed something to do with her hands, something to keep her from picking up her phone or pacing the room. Titles she loved, books she had read aloud 100 times, lay open in disarray. She reached for a cloth to dust a cover, paused, then dropped it again. Her mind was too loud. Then came the knock. It was soft at first. She didn't move. Another knock followed. Then came the sound she couldn't mistake. Light giggles, the crinkle of paper, and the quiet murmur of small voices she had missed so much it hurt. Hillary rose slowly, her body stiff from sitting, her heart racing. She approached the door cautiously and pulled it open. There, framed in the morning light, stood Jazzy and Daisy, their small arms stretched, wide eyes shining with a kind of hope too sincere to be rehearsed. Behind them, just a few steps back, stood Richard, hands tucked in the pockets of his coat, his expression unreadable but patient. Hillary dropped to her knees, her breath catching. "Jazzy," she whispered, her voice cracking as tears rushed to her eyes. In an instant, both girls flew into her arms, burying their faces in her neck, wrapping her in warmth that went far beyond touch. She held them close, rocking slightly as emotion poured out. "I missed you," she said through sobs. So much." Richard didn't interrupt. He stood quietly watching, letting the moment unfold without claiming space. Only when Hillary looked up, eyes, red face, wet with tears, did he speak. "I didn't come with headlines," he said, his voice low and steady. "I didn't come with promises. I just came with my heart. And theirs." Hillary stood slowly still, holding the girls close. Her expression was wary but open. "Why did you really come?" she asked, her voice hushed. Richard exhaled. "Because I can live without all the rest, the fame, the business, the noise, but not without this, not without you." The girls clung to her tighter, as if their little bodies understood the weight of the moment. Hillary closed her eyes, then opened them slowly. "I thought I had to protect you from all of it," she said. He stepped closer, careful not to break the fragile space between them. "You were trying to protect us by leaving," he replied softly. "But that's not protection, that's pain." Her gaze held his for a long beat. Then she opened the door wider. "Then come in," she said. He stepped inside, the girls still wrapped around her legs. The space felt smaller now, but not cramped, just full of breath, full of feeling, full of something unmistakably human. "I don't need anything else," he whispered. Hillary nodded, her voice breaking again. "Me neither." And this time no one let go. The days that followed didn't return life to what it had been before, but they shaped something better, something quieter, more intentional. Richard and Hillary didn't make declarations or post polished photos. There were no flashy date nights or staged events. Just early morning pancakes, story time on the living room rug, and trips to the grocery store where Jazzy insisted on steering the cart and Daisy rode inside with a lopsided grin. Hillary took it slow. She moved gently through her days, still finding her footing. Richard never pushed. The world had already yanked her out of her comfort zone. He would not be another force pulling at her. Instead, he asked her one night as they sat on the porch watching the girls chase fireflies, "If you could do anything in the world, anything at all, what would it be?" Hillary smiled, the kind of smile that came from remembering rather than performing. "I'd start a reading program," she said, "for kids who don't have books at home, for the ones who stay at the library until closing time because they don't want to go home." Richard nodded without hesitation. "Then let's build it." And they did. They called it Story Nest, a mobile reading program that brought books and warmth to shelters, community centers, and schools with few resources. Hillary chose every book herself, organized volunteers, and read aloud to children with the same quiet care she had given Jazzy and Daisy that very first night. Richard funded the program privately. He stayed behind the scenes, letting her lead. When reporters reached out, he declined interviews. Instead, his communications team issued press releases that highlighted Story Nest and its growing impact. Slowly, the narrative shifted. The headlines no longer asked about the mystery librarian. They celebrated the work the children, the simple beauty of reading, shared aloud in safe spaces. And when Richard sat quietly in the back of those sessions, listening to Hillary's voice rise and fall as she brought the pages to life, he knew without question this was the legacy worth building. Not the company, not the name. This. At home, life settled into something gentle and real. There were no headlines, no hushed gossip, just the quiet rhythm of four people learning to trust the days ahead. Hillary began staying for dinner more often, at first out of courtesy, then out of comfort. One evening led to the next, until staying felt less like a visit and more like belonging. When the girls asked her to stay the night, she didn't hesitate, and from then on, bedtime became its own kind of ceremony. Each night, Hillary would curl up with them on the couch or sit cross-legged on the rug holding open a storybook worn soft by use. She gave every character a voice, growly for grumpy bears, squeaky for curious mice. Jazzy and Daisy would giggle, clutching her sleeves, always asking for one more page, then two, then three. She taught them how to draw faces that showed feelings, how to stitch together their own picture books from printer paper and markers. Richard often lingered in the hallway, just out of view, his hand resting on the doorway. He listened not to the words, but to the tone, the laughter, the gentleness, the sense that something broken inside him was quietly being mended. One evening, they read a story about a lost bear who found a home in the forest with a family that didn't look like him but loved him all the same. As Hillary turned the final page, the girls yawned and nestled under the covers. The bedroom was bathed in soft golden light from the small lamp by the bed. Jazzy was already dozing, but Daisy's eyes fluttered open and fixed on Hillary's face. "Miss Hillary," she murmured. Hillary smoothed back Daisy's curls, her fingers light. "Yes, sweetheart." Daisy blinked half asleep. "Can I call you Mama Hillary?" Everything stilled. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Richard, who had been standing silently in the hallway, froze in place, one hand gripping the doorframe. Hillary's eyes filled almost instantly. She dropped to her knees beside the bed and took Daisy's hand into her own. "If that's what you want," she whispered, her voice trembling, "then yes, of course you can." Daisy gave a sleepy nod and curled into her pillow. Jazzy stirred, reached over, and took Hillary's other hand. Hillary leaned down and kissed each of their foreheads, her tears falling freely now, not from sorrow, but something softer, something closer to awe. Richard stepped inside. Without a word, he sat at the edge of the bed and reached for Hillary's hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The room held them all. Later that night, when the girls were tucked in tight and the dishes had been done, Hillary and Richard stepped out onto the porch. A blanket was draped over both their shoulders, and the breeze carried the soft tinkling of the wind chimes his mother had hung decades earlier. The porch light glowed warm above them, casting a quiet circle of peace. Hillary exhaled slow and deep. "I never wanted to replace anyone," she said softly. "You didn't," Richard replied. "You became something entirely your own." She leaned against his shoulder. "I didn't think I had enough to give, not to fill that space." His voice was thick but steady. "You didn't need to fill it. You gave them a safe place. You gave me something to believe in again." Hillary looked up at him through fresh tears. "I guess us, it just happened." Richard shook his head. "No," he said gently. "It didn't just happen. We chose this. Every small moment. Every quiet yes. We built this together." Hillary nodded, her eyes shining. They didn't need big declarations or a public promise. In the stillness of that evening, beneath the ordinary porch light and the steady hum of crickets, what they had was already whole. 1 year later, many things had changed, and yet so much remained beautifully simple. Hillary still lived in her cozy apartment above the Pine Street bookstore. She returned to the library, not out of obligation, but love. She found joy in every name, remembered every child who waited for her at the door. Her photo no longer appeared in tabloids or gossip columns. Now she was known quietly as the founder of Story Nest, as Miss Hillary, to a new generation of readers, and that was more than enough. Richard never asked her to move into his sprawling estate. He understood deeply that she needed roots, not marble floors. Most of their shared days took place at the old cottage, the one with the creaky porch, the chattering wind chimes, and the endless supply of crayons on the coffee table. The girls grew in that space, not just in inches, but in spirit. It was where they brought their hearts night after night, and Hillary never let a single one fall. And so life went on, not flashy, not headline-worthy, but strong, steady, whole. The afternoon sun filtered gently through the tall oaks that bordered the backyard, casting long, dappled shadows over the grass. It was one of those mild spring days when the air feels soft against the skin, touched by warmth, but not yet summer heavy. A light breeze rustled the budding leaves, and somewhere off in the distance, a wind chime offered a faint melodic clinking. The smell of grilled chicken and sweet lemonade lingered in the air, mingling with the sound of Jazzy and Daisy's laughter as they dashed barefoot through the yard, their dark curls bouncing wildly with each step. Richard had spent the morning out back, carefully reassembling an old wooden picnic table. The wood was slightly warped, in places stained by age and memory. Its legs creaked when pressure was applied, and the chairs around it didn't match. One still had a sticker of a cartoon unicorn peeling from its backrest. But to him, it was perfect. It was the same table where everything had changed. And when Hillary stepped outside carrying a bowl of strawberries, she stopped and stared at it, her lips curving into a smile that was more surprised than amused. "You brought back the wrong table," she said, her voice teasing, but her eyes warm. Richard grinned, brushing a bit of sawdust from his jeans. "Some mistakes," he said, "are worth keeping." They sat together under the soft light, surrounded by daisies the girls had scattered like confetti. The table was set with paper plates, plastic cups filled with lemonade, and slices of cake that tilted dangerously to one side. After dessert, the twins vanished into the house, their whispers barely concealed by giggles. When they returned, Daisy held something small, wrapped in a bundle of napkins that looked like it had barely survived the trip from the kitchen. "For you," she announced proudly, dropping the parcel into Hillary's lap. Hillary peeled back the layers, slowly revealing a ring made of soft rope and colorful beads. It was lopsided, clearly handmade with more love than precision. Her eyes watered as she looked at it, her fingertips tracing the tiny hearts drawn in marker along the band. "We made it," Jazzy said. "It's your special ring." Richard knelt beside her, his breath catching. For a moment, he didn't speak. He looked at Hillary the way a man looks when all the noise has finally fallen away, and the truth stands alone. "I used to believe I'd only be loved for what I had. The name, the money." The headlines, he began. But then came a wrong table, two little girls who see everything, and a woman who looked right past all of it and saw me. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "I'm not asking for headlines or a ceremony on a magazine cover. Just this. Be you with us. Be the heart of this home." He paused, his voice steady but full. "Hillary Jeffrey, will you marry me?" Hillary laughed even as tears rolled down her cheeks. She slid the beaded ring onto her finger, where it sat snugly, imperfectly perfect. "We've been a family for a while now," she said softly. "You're just catching up." The girls' squealed arms flung around both adults in a blur of hugs and bright noise. The backyard echoed with their delight, the sun hanging low and golden. There were no photographers, no scrolling headlines, just airlight and the quiet certainty of belonging. That evening, after the dishes had been washed and the sun dipped behind the trees, Richard and Hillary sat together on the porch swing. The old swing creaked gently with their weight, and a blanket covered their legs. From the kitchen window, the warm glow of nightlights framed the silhouette of the girls asleep in their beds. "You weren't the wrong woman," Richard whispered, his head resting lightly against hers. "Just the right one at a table no one expected." Hillary smiled, the porch light softening the edges of her face. "And you were never the billionaire," she murmured. "You were the dad with kind eyes and spaghetti on his shirt." In the stillness of that night, there were no speeches, no fireworks, just two people wrapped in a blanket and the weightless knowledge that they'd made it through. Together. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with perfect timing. It walks in, late sits at the wrong table, and flips your world without warning. Richard had once hidden behind wealth, afraid to be seen without it. Hillary had once believed her simple, quiet world had no room for something as grand as love, but what endured was never about status or perfect plans. It was bedtime stories and sticky crayon hearts, shared glances across spaghetti-stained tables, and a woman who didn't need to change to matter. In a world full of noise, they had found their own corner of peace, and in that corner, a family bloomed. Thank you truly for staying with us through this journey, from the very first spaghetti-splattered dinner to the daisy chains and porch swing promises. This wasn't just a story about a millionaire CEO or a blind date gone beautifully wrong. It was about love found in the most unpolished moments, about second chances, quiet courage, and what it means to be seen, not for your name or your past, but for the goodness you carry inside. Stories like this remind us that the most heartwarming love stories don't need a spotlight. They just need a heartbeat. They need someone willing to stay, someone willing to believe again. If this story touched something in you, if it stirred your soul, made you smile, or brought a tear, please share that feeling. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your reflections, your stories. To everyone who watches, listens, and supports these emotional stories, thank you. Your kindness, your time, your encouragement mean more than you know. This is just one of many touching stories still to come. So if you want more heartwarming moments like this, more real stories that speak to the quiet parts of life, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps keep this little corner of storytelling alive. We'll see you in the next chapter. Until then, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in love.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.